Okay, welcome everyone to this session on JS1. We're going to be going over content that's in modules 1, 2, and 3, but I think it's useful for anyone who's working on JavaScript at the moment just to have a refresher. Maybe you're on JS2 and you just want to go back over this stuff. And I might even show some content that is either introduced later on in the course or it is not introduced in the course. I'll try to keep that to a minimum just to avoid it being too confusing. But if you see something unfamiliar, just shout out or send a message on the group and I'll stop and explain what I'm doing at that point. So the brief or the purpose of this session is to create a online marketplace for NFTs because that's very trendy and I'm just like that. So the real reason we're doing this is because I have finished a project that I was working on over summer. It's very similar, except that was a full enterprise scale application that's got thousands of users. So I've got a little bit of experience with this concept and I thought it would translate nicely to a kind of e-commerce project because all I need is an image, right? Like if I have an image, that's my product. So I don't need to come up with 100 fake products, like 100 different types of jacket or something like that. That is going to be very tricky for me. So instead, I've offloaded all of the hard creative work onto DALL-E here. For those of you who don't know, DALL-E is a natural language processing AI. So it is designed to accept a text prompt and produce an image from that text prompt. It'll produce 4 images for each prompt. So I had some suggestions from the students and I've added some of my own prompts as well. And what we're going to do in a second is take a look at the output of those because I think I've got 70 or 80 images now based on those prompts, which is great. But just as a introduction, if someone has a prompt and wants to put it in the chat, we can test out DALL-E just to see what we're expecting from the system and how, because this is a sort of origin point of the project, it's important to see what format we're going to get our images in, how they're going to be named, what kind of data is available in the name of the image and stuff like that. So I'm going to give you all a few seconds to have a think, and it can be literally anything. It doesn't matter if it's like boring or random or whatever, just to prove the point. And whilst you guys are thinking about that, I'm going to go over to the project. I do have lots of files here already, as you can see, and that's because I've done a test run of this already. So I have something to show you at the start of the session. You're not going to have to wait 2 hours until the end to see the interesting part. But I'm then going to delete most of this work. I'm going to nuke it all, and we're going to rebuild it from scratch so that you can see not only how to tackle these problems and how to think about these problems, but like the order that the problems are solved in. So we can ignore most of these files for now. I've got a little plan document here, which has got our topics that we're going to be going over. So I'll just run through those quickly. So I'm hoping to, in the space of 1 or 2 hours, we'll see how much stamina we all have. In the space of 1 or 2 hours, I want to demonstrate all of these topics in a practical way. So not just coming up with an example and showing you the example. I want to show you how these are most useful. So we're going to cover JSON. We're going to cover DOM manipulation. And with this one, there's a little bit of a debate, or not everyone does DOM manipulation in the same way, but let me put it that way. So the way that I prefer is not the same as the way that other people prefer. And there's actually another way on top of that completely. So we're going to talk a little bit about the different ways to do DOM manipulation and which way might be best in a certain situation, because one of them is never best all of the time. So we're going to talk about which ones work the best for us. We're also going to look at functions. We're going to look at arguments, whether they're default arguments or not. We're going to look at return values from a function, and we're going to look at arrow function syntax as well. For array methods, I'm going to stick to these three, even though there are many others. We're going to go over for each map and reduce. I think these are the three most common. I mean, we will also cover find and filter, actually, now I think about it. So we'll have 5 array methods, and we're going to be using those to achieve certain tasks. Then we've got events. I think the only events that are going to be in use are going to be submit and click. I might have an extra one in there somewhere, but I think these are the main 2 that we're going to be looking at. Submit coming from a form and click coming from anything. And then a little bit of work with data attributes. They'll be mildly important, I think is the best way to put it. I didn't get to doing filtering yet, so maybe they'll be more relevant when we get to that stage of the project, which it could be in this session or it could be in a session next week, depending on how we go today. I'm not going to go into huge detail about truthy and falsy values, apart from showing a few sort of shortcuts, syntax shortcuts that come from an understanding of this, and why understanding truthy values can be very helpful in writing less code. And then we will also be using query strings too. So that is hopefully all of the concepts that I'm going to cover in this session. And I'm not going to do any arbitrary examples. So project anatomy, we'll go over that just now. I'll talk you through the files we've got. And then what is my plan? At the moment, all my plan involves is deleting all of the files and starting again. But that's really because my plan involves writing this plan out again to show you. So at the moment, the first thing I'm going to do is delete everything, and then we'll rebuild from there. So how many prompts do I have in my chat window? 0. Excellent. Okay. Well, we won't bother demoing DALL-E because I'm sure you all know how it works already. But if any of you do come up with a prompt in the future, it will be relevant to this session. So adding images to the system is part of this session. I want to talk about that. So I do want some people to give me a few prompts whilst I'm talking about the project. So just keep that in the back of your head. If something comes to mind, put it in the chat and I will put it in here, and that will be part of the session. Okay, so I'm gonna have a sip of water and then we can, okay, that's good. Sip of water, we can let DALL-E process that for a second, and then I'll show you the project as it looks now. I've been having a lot of fun with this system. I'm not an art. Oh, trouble hearing me properly. Is it that I'm not loud enough, or is it that that it's crackly or it's broken? Okay. All right. I think that's probably going to be to do with your connection. Yeah, DALL-E is very similar to Midjourney. I've only just been introduced to that one, so I've been playing around with both of them. I definitely think that Midjourney is the more impressive of the two, but this is the one I have access to, and I have a feeling this is going to be the one that ends up dominating. So we'll see what the marketplace looks like in a year or so. Okay, so here we have our outputs. And what I want to do with this output is to download the images. I haven't found a nice way to bulk download them yet. And I'm going to put those into the correct folder here. And I have a special folder in the project already called static. And you can see that's already got loads of images in. So I'm just going to save all of these to the same place. That's annoying. I have to select it again. And again, there must be a recent. There we go. Okay, cool. So we've downloaded our images, and if I just, actually, I want to take a look at that image file name, because that is something that we're going to be using. Anyone with very good eyesight might be able to see that I spelt repos wrong a long time ago, and now I'm stuck with it. Okay.
In the description if you want to follow along on this part.
All right, so if we look at this, I'm not sure how big that is. So let's just go back to VS Code and blow that up a bit. So we can see the name of the project, DALI. We can see the date, or today's date. Is it today's date? No, it's not. And the time. Although I don't think, oh, sorry, yeah, no, I'm looking at an existing file. I thought I was looking at the file we just created. That's why I was confused about the date. So this is one I created a while ago, and this is the time. And then we have this is the prompt here. So that's all of the data we get, effectively 2 pieces of data, the name of the prompt and the date and the time. So where does that data go? How have I set this project up? I'm not going to be using an API, so I have to sort of fake my API. I could use an API, but that would be a different session, and maybe I can hook it up to an API in future in another session. But for now, I'm going to be mocking all of the backend behavior myself. This is not part of the session, as in you're not expected to know this. It's actually not covered at all in this course, but I just want to show you the mechanism that I'm using to set this project up. So this is a node file. It is JavaScript, but it's not going to run on the browser. It's going to run on my computer. And all this does is it looks in the static folder, and it's going to read the actual files. It's going to read the folder, and it's going to list all of the file names in that folder. And then I'm doing a bit of analysis on the file name, finding the date, finding the name. I'm assigning an ID, so I'm making up an ID. It's going to be a random jumble of letters. And then I'm forming an object, and this object represents one item. So an item has an ID, it has a collection name. So in the example we just looked at, that would be the United States of space debris. And the source is going to be where the image lives. The URL is going to be where the what the address of that NFT is going to be on our app. So in theory, at this point, I could remove that, but we're going to keep it because it's useful. Price is random. Owner is being set to null at the moment. On sale is random, and created date is a proper JavaScript date made up from, you can see it's really ugly. This is not clean code because I didn't intend to go through it in great detail. This is doing a job. It is taking everything in this static folder, and it's giving me a nice JavaScript. Oh, it's actually giving me a JSON file. So I'm going to close this because that's all you need to know about it. And if I go back over here, this is what it happens when I run that script. It gives me a long list of all of my images. And for each image, I have an ID, collection name, source, URL, price, owner, on sale, created date. So they're all the same. They're nice and uniform. This is like the response you'd get from an API. So this is going to be our data source. We can just imagine that this is coming from an API. And because it's actually a JSON file, we are going to fetch it. So even though all of these files and all of this data is on my computer, we're still going to be using fetch in the same way that you would with an API. So hopefully that'll be a good enough analog. And excuse me for not doing back-end stuff as well as front end. I didn't have that much time. Okay, so let's take a look at the front end of the project. Check the chat quickly. Yep, so if we go over here, this is how my project looks right now. And this is based on 1 day of development work yesterday. I think it took me about 4 hours. And a lot of that was making choices, making decisions. It wasn't necessarily 4 hours of coding. And now I've made all those decisions. It's going to be quicker this time around. So we have all of our icons here. And if you click on one, it gives you a very simple sort of product page with the collection name, the ID, the created date, because that's really all we have to say about this. We don't have a description. We don't have attributes or anything like that about the product. So it's very simple. I intend for this to be built upon in this session. And we also have a very simple sign up system. So if you click login, you have put my name in here, and it doesn't actually check the password. It doesn't send the data to an API. It just,
yeah. I was thinking I go home now, but it's really.
Thanks. So this is not sending data anywhere. This is just putting it in local storage. So it's just to give the illusion that there is a real user system. You can log in, you can log out, and it will actually let you log in as anything, because it's not a real login system. So it's just there to give a bit of life to the site. The search doesn't work. These tabs don't go anywhere. And yeah, generally speaking, the site is incomplete. It's a shell or a skeleton. But we're going to look at how I got to this point, and then we're also going to look at where you go next from here. So I'm in. Oops. So I'm in my changes area. I have a Git repo here. The most important thing this Git repo is doing for me is keeping track of branches. I have my master branch, which I'm going to keep with all the files, and I have this demo branch, which is what we're on now. So being on the demo branch is going to allow me to do some pretty radical things like deleting files. And those will show up in here as deleted, and I can say deleted HTML files and commit that. And I'm not worried, I'm not stressed even a little bit, because I know if I do this and go back to master, those files are going to suddenly reappear. So I know that my work is safe, and that gives me the confidence to be bold and to do drastic things and change things in ways that might otherwise be a little bit scary. So I'm happy to delete stuff. I'm going to leave my leave my static folder with all the images in, leave data.json because that's our source. I'm going to leave node modules. This can go. I will start from scratch with the index file. I'm going to leave these two. So these two files are really, I'm only really using it to run that backend file. So again, it's not part of the lesson. It's not something you have to worry about, but it is also good to be familiar with a file called package.json because it is very, very, very useful in the future. So I think, okay, then we've got our CSS. I think there's only one style because I'm using Bootstrap. So most of the styling is going to be just using Bootstrap classes instead of writing everything out. I just wanted to have a nice price class there. And then the JavaScript, yep, let's go ahead and get rid of it all. Move to trash. I'll leave that CSS there. Deleted all the things. Okay, so our project's not going to work now. There's no JavaScript, there's no HTML, there's nothing to actually view. So before we start adding any files, we need to think about planning, because launching into a project is very fun, but it's not necessarily the best way to get results, especially if you've got a limited amount of time. Knowing when to stop or knowing when to move on is crucial, because otherwise you get stuck. And one thing you'll be stuck on for 3-4 hours, and it saps your morale, it saps your energy, and the answer is probably going to take you 2 seconds to implement once you actually figure it out. So if your brain is not giving you the answer for more than an hour or so, it's best to switch gears, try and do something else, work on another part of the project, and come back to your problem area in the future. Some problems are going to block progress completely, but if you've made a plan and you know which other areas you can move on to, it helps to unblock the way. Okay, so we've deleted all our files, and now we need to think about, what do we actually require? What is this project? It's an e-commerce project. It has a login. We know a little bit about the functionality we need. So we need to be clear about that. So we're going to have the requirements. It needs to show products, right? Show product thumbnails. It needs to show a product detail page. We need a buy action. The reason I'm not calling it a button is because when we're thinking about the JavaScript side, the action is separate to the button. The button triggers the action, and we're more worried about the action than what's triggering it, because that's just presentation, right? It could be a link or a div or a whatever. Semantically, it should be a button, but it's not our business. In JavaScript, we don't really, we're not interested in what's going on in the HTML to that extent. What color theme am I using? I think I'm just using the default like dark theme. I don't really remember ever installing a theme. If I did it like 5 years ago, and it's carrying over to a new computer somehow. Okay, sorry, back on track. Buy action, and we've got a wish list action. We've got, okay. Login, log out. And then we probably want to do some filtering and some sorting. And I think that covers everything. So we know that we're going to need at least like one function for each of these, right? Like these actions are definitely going to have at least one function each. And then some of these, like when we're showing a detail page and we're showing a list of thumbnails, we might need more than one function. So we already can expect to have like maybe 10 functions that we're going to need to write. And then if we write those out, we'll see that there's a few that branch off from that. So our functions are going to be things like get products and get product singular with an ID. So yeah, let's write it like that. We're going to have buy product with an ID and a price. We're going to have wish lists with ID. Yeah, so the wish list is the favorites. We can call it favorites. Favorite product. Maybe that should be add to favorites. Add to favorites. We've got login, username, password. Log out, which doesn't require anything. Filter products, something like that. And I'm not 100% sure what the arguments are going to be for that right now. And we've got sort products. And again, I'm not sure exactly how we're going to handle that argument. So I'm just going to leave it as a question mark from now. It's fine. We don't have to know everything. And if I look at this list here, I can probably make an assumption that this one and this one and this one are going to all require local storage, because we want to save favorites, and we want the favorites to persist over multiple sessions. We don't want to lose our favorites when we refresh the page or open a new window. So these three are going to have local storage. I'm going to group them together just to make it slightly easier to read. And that means that we're going to have things like save to local, which would be key value, and get from local key, and remove from local key. Saying that I have to buy an upgrade to Zoom, which is not great. I don't want to do that. Does anyone know if I can just overrun, like if I just ignore the time limit and overrun it? I seem to remember that working in the past, but I'm not sure if they've changed it. Let's see what happens in 10 minutes time. Okay, so we need local storage functions. We've got those there. And this one, get products, is going to be API, so it's going to be fetch. But I think that's more or less what we need for now. So this gives us an idea of the core functionality from a high level. So we know we're going to need something like all of these, and they may need their own supplementary functions as well. They fall into certain groups, right? So these two, I think, form their own little group. And these two here, I would also say filtering and sorting are related. I would say that adding to favorites and buying a product are quite similar. And logging in and logging out are very similar. That leaves us with our local storage methods. So when we are creating the structure for our site, for our app, this is a sensible way to start structuring it. So we can start with some folders and say, okay, cool, we're going to have products, a folder called products, and that's going to have these functions in them. And let's make a folder called, actually, filtering and sourcing products probably deserves to go in the same area because they're all related to products. So we can maybe put all four of these files in here. And then we'll, new folder. For the buy and the add to favorites, we could group them under actions. Oops, that's not the right place. Excuse my chickens. So we've got actions, we've got products. And then I'm going to have one for user. So that's going to be login, logout. And lastly, we'll have one for storage, which will be our local storage functions. I think it's pretty common to start with like getting the data, so that you have something to work with, and then building the rest out. So in terms of the plan, the first thing is going to be to create an HTML file. Second thing is going to be to build out products.js. Then we're going to move on to, I think storage makes sense because that is a prerequisite for the other methods. Then we will do the actions. And lastly, we will do the user stuff. I think that I'm probably not going to have enough time on Zoom to do all of this. I might see if I can switch to Discord chat or something if we get kicked out of this. So look on the thread on Discord if this meeting abruptly ends. That's not what I intend to happen. Okay, enough planning. It's boring, but now we have a quite short, quite manageable way to start this project. So let's create our index file. And for those of you not familiar with Emmet, typing a single exclamation mark in Emmet will give you a really nice document template. It doesn't have anything else apart from the absolute bare minimum. And we can call this NFT market. And what do we want next? We want to add Bootstrap because I'm not going to be doing any styling. So we are going to go over here, and I'm going to take this link and pop it in here. I'm going to take this and pop it in here. Now we've got an empty file. If we open this in Live Java, blank file, nothing in it. But we can, if the Zoom bar will hide for me, I currently can't get behind it. Here we go. Okay, so I'm going to go straight to examples because I want to pull one of these examples as a basis for the site. I'm quite happy with that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pinch the whole body. Maybe that's not a good idea. I'm going to pinch this, the header. I'm going to pinch this. And then cut a load of content out. So if we go back to our page here, we don't need any of this content. So main can be empty for now, because I really just want the header. That was probably totally unnecessary. I could have just grabbed a header from that anyway. Stick with it. So this is also NFT market. And that's going to be a link to the home page. And we don't need another link to the home page. What do we need link to? Collections, NFTs. Okay. Our main section is going to be populated by JavaScript. So this is the sort of template for our whole site. We're going to need to add some more stuff in here because we have our own link, which is here. And we also have our own scripts, or we will have our own script because we have these files here or these folders. So I'm just going to create that now. I'm going to call it index.js and just going to reference it down here. Okay. Whilst I'm setting up this file, I want this to be a module. So I want to be able to do stuff like import something from somewhere. And since I want to do this, I need to add something here. Just type module. And that will just mean that I can use this kind of syntax without causing a problem. Okay, so now we are hooked up. We have an HTML file that's going to respond to our changes. But the HTML work is far from done. So if we go back to our scripts and create a products file, exactly the same way that you have index.html and index.js, whenever I'm creating a folder, I will create an index.js file for that folder. You don't have to. It is quite common, but it's just a habit for me. So if we have get products.js and we have get product.js, so there's a difference between getting all of them and getting one of them. And in fact, I need to rename this already. So my plan has already failed me because this is going to be get collections. I'll explain why in a second. Collection. So the reason I couldn't call it get product is because if we look at our data, each collection has its own items, and each item is one image. So a collection can have any number of children, and then we have a bunch of these collections. So we've got these two layers to the hierarchy, which is why it's not just a case of saying get products, because there's two ways that you can think about products. You can think about them as a grouping, or you can think about them as an individual item. All right, so for each of these files, they're probably going to have one function each. So for get collections, this is where we're going to start. We're going to have function, async function, get collections. And this is going to fetch. And the place it's going to fetch is our data.json. And then it's going to return. So this is the whole function. I could have written it differently. I could have written it like this. Or I could have put a try catch block in there. But this is all I want. If there's an error, I want to know there's an error. Maybe there's one more thing we can do here. Because if we were to say data_f, there's no such file as data_f. So that's going to be a 404 error. But a 404 error is a successful response. That's the server saying that it looked for what you asked and it couldn't find it. So the response was technically successful, even though you didn't get the data that you wanted. So what we can do here is check if the response was okay. And we can say, if response is okay, then return whatever you got from that file. And then if it's not okay, I'm going to throw a new error. This is not part of the course. This is just something that is quite convenient. And the error is going to be the response status. So if it's a 404, that's what we're going to get in our JavaScript error. Now we can take that away because that's an intentional mistake. This is the only one of our functions that's actually going to be doing any fetching. The rest of them rely on this function. So I need to use that here. So when I'm getting a single collection, I'm going to have async function get collection ID. And the first thing I need to do is get the collections. But I can't do that without the function I just created. Oh wait, oops. So I have to export this so that I can import it here. So we're going to get all of the collections, and then we're going to return collections. So this is the first of our array methods here. The data we're getting from this function is all of the data here. So we're going to get this whole file, this whole array of objects in here. So because we know it's an array, we know that we have find available. And because we're iterating through a number of collections, the individual is going to be called collection singular rather than collections plural. And here we have an arrow function, right? So we could write here function collection and do it like that. Return collection.id equals ID. Okay, so that's the criteria that we're going to use to check if this is the right collection to return based on the ID we provided here. So we could write it like that, but we can actually cut down on some typing there by saying collection and then just putting our return statement directly in here. So I'll type both of those out again and put them next to each other just so you can see the difference. So these two things are exactly the same. They do the same thing, but to my eyes, that is slightly nicer to read. So I'm going to use that one. Okay, so we also need to export this, otherwise we won't be able to use it in any other files. And now we have our means to get these two things, so let's just stop there and test that out. So in our index file, so just to give you an idea of the way these files are going to run, index.js will always run. So every single page, whether it's the login page or it's the products page or whatever it is, the home page, index.js is always going to run on every single page. We may have functions that are specific to like a certain area of the site, but those will be kept separately. So this is stuff that this is like our global code. So we can import get collection, oops, that's wrong. Get collection from products, get collection.js, and we can set up a little test function. Actually, I'll do get collections, and we can say get collections, then console.log. And if we go to our project over here and we refresh, we can see we've got 17 items in the console, and that represents 17 collections. And I've just realized that a collection doesn't have an ID. So back in this file, I need to change that to collection name. And we're going to rename this. So I'll rename this by pressing F2. And that brings a little window up, and then enter. And that makes sure that it renames that variable for everywhere it needs to be renamed, instead of just forgetting one of those. So now I think we should test that. So we're going to do something very similar. We're going to say get collection instead of collections. And we're going to say, let's pick a name from here, cat in the style of Pokemon. Okay, so get a collection with the name cat in the style of Pokemon, then console log the result. And there we have our collection with 4 items, and we can see that we have these IDs, and we have the data for each of the items, and we have the URL for the image, or the source for the image. So that's all looking pretty good to me. Based on that sort of structure, we can continue with these. So get NFTs is going to be a little different, because all of our NFTs are nested inside these collections. So how do we, if we wanted a list of all of these child items together and we didn't want any of the collection data, we would have to do something unusual to this array. So what we're going to do is show off how reduce can be used to fetch this stuff. So I'm saying export async function, and this is get NFTs. And we are going to start in the same way. So we're going to start in the same way here. We're going to make this import, because we need to get all of the collections first to start working with them. We're going to copy this as well, except we're not going to do the find operation on collections. Instead, we're going to return collections.reduce. So again, I'll do it with both syntaxes. So reduce takes a accumulator, and it takes, the arguments provided are the accumulator and the current value. So if I write those out, emulator and current, and then you need to return something, as always with the array method. We are going to be returning just the, how do I explain this? Like, reduce is the right word for this function because we're taking this big thing, this big chunky array, and we're going to boil it down. Like, think about reducing, like the context of cooking, like reducing down a sauce or reducing down a soup or a broth or something like that. You're removing content. You're making it, I want to say making it simpler, but that's not at all what it is. Struggling with my analogy is the real answer. You're taking something chunky and you're making it a little bit smoother. So we're going to be hoisting these items out and forming one array with all of these items. So, and I also need to put this here. So reduce, we're going to be returning, let's see if I get this right, accumulator, current dot items. So when I say current, I can rename this to collection because that's really what it is. So accumulator and collection, and we can also rename this. We can call this NFTs, right? So now it gets a little bit more clear what we're doing here. This is going to be a list, our like output. So this is going to be the final result. And this is the current collection we're looking at now. And what we want to return is the value of this, but that value is going to keep getting bigger and bigger and bigger. So as we work through each collection, we're going to be adding like 4 NFTs, 4 NFTs, 3 NFTs, 4 NFTs, 2 NFTs, until this list is very big. It's really hard to explain without an analogy, and I'm really struggling for an analogy on this, but I hope that kind of made sense. I think maybe I can add some console logs to try and explain what's going on here. So these consoles, again, this is going to fire for every single item. So we have 17 collections. This is going to fire 17 times. And you should see...
Oliver?
Yep.
Are you recording?
I'm recording on my PC, yeah. Okay, so we're going to log the value of this, which should start off as just an empty array. This is our starting value, and this is eventually going to be our end value. And then we can also log collection items. Oh, that needs to be like this as well. So this syntax here, for those of you who have not come across this, it's not in JS1, it's in JS2, but it's so useful that I can't really live without it. This is the spread operator, and this is a way of like merging two structures together. So you can use it for an object and you can also use it for an array, and it will effectively like combine the contents of one array into another array. So it flattens out an array. Because if we didn't do these dots, we'd end up with a weird array where we had like arrays inside arrays like this. And we don't want that. So we want one nice flat array, and that's what this hopefully should give us if I got my syntax correct, which there is a chance that I did not. So let's test it out. If you can hear that in the background, that is a vervet monkey growling at me. They're very aggressive and quite horrible animals. Okay. So let's clear this and try and get a good look at what's going on here. So, let's remove these two as well because they are confusing me. Okay, so the only thing in our console now has come from this getNFTs function. And we need to look at it line by line because each one of these lines is a loop, and there's 17 lines. So this is showing us through time how our object is being built up. And you can see, to begin with, you have an empty array and you have 3 items. And then on stage 2, you have an array with 3 items and another array with 3 items. In the next one, you have an array of 6 items and an array of 3 items. In the next one, you have 9 and 1. And then you have 10 and 4. Then you have 14 and 4. So on and so forth. We're just adding, we're grouping all of these items together so that when we pop open this last one, which is what's actually going to be returned from the function. So when we look here, this function is returning the reduce, and so it's going to return the last value, the one with 62. So this is what the function is going to give us, and we can see that they're all nice and neat. They all have IDs. If we pop them open, we'll see the rest of the data is there. So we have successfully reduced this data down to a new array, and that means that this file is done. In the same way that we did with collections and collection, we can do with NFTs and NFT. So this is going to start with an import of get NFTs. I don't know why it's telling me that. Okay, then we're going to export async function. This time we do want an ID, because we have, if we look at our object, the NFT object has an ID. And we're going to get NFTs. I need to await that as well. And then we're going to do the same thing, return NFTs.find, and we're going to say NFT arrow function. If that NFT's ID matches the ID that we passed in as a parameter, then that's the one. And if we go to our main page, we can test this out. So I need to grab one of these IDs, because unlike the collection, they don't have a nice English thing for me to remember. So I'm going to say, go fetch this one and tell me about it in the console. Oh, and I need to remove that. Okay. And there we go. We have our single item as we wanted it. The ID matches. So we now have these 4 functions. They are all related. They actually all depend on this one, but they do different things. And you know, if we're rendering a detail page for just one collection or one NFT item, there's no point in doing all that work in lots of different places. Like if you have 3 files, they're going to need that. It makes much more sense to have one function that's going to do that task every single time, and then we can use that in our scripts to create page functionality. So the last thing I'm going to show you for this little module, and when I say module, I mean module, because this is a folder. It contains files. Those files export things. That's kind of all a module really means. So in the index file for products, you see they're on the same level. It's different to this. It's different to the main index file. The job of this file is just for convenience. So we're not going to write any like real code in here. We're just going to export everything, right? Star means everything from, and we're going to do this for all of our 4 files. Collections, get NFTs, and that's all we need to do. So all this file is saying is whatever is in its sibling files, export those. Why do we do that? why go to the extra effort? It is because we can, in our main file, instead of having these 4 separate imports, we can say import everything as product, or let's call it store. We can call it whatever we want. You know, you can call it ABC if you really want, but I'm going to call it store. I realize I should have really renamed the products folder, but we can do that in a second. So this is effectively replacing all of these, because now I can say store.getNFT, or I can say store.getCollections, or store.whatever, getCollection. All this does is give convenience, but in terms of like your mental space, this is really useful, because it groups things together in a way that makes it very obvious that they're meant to live together and they share common components. So if we followed this pattern for products, we're going to have the same sort of thing for actions, and we're going to have the same sort of thing for storage and users. Like user is going to be user.log, go away, user.login, right? User.logout. It gives us something nice to read as well, like for a human to read. It sort of says what it's going to do. User, login, store, get collections. It's almost like you're building a sentence up by grouping these items in that way. And that's a very positive thing. That's something that makes your code much more readable and approachable, especially to other people, if they can see that you've put the effort in to group your files together in this way. Another benefit so it might seem weird to have such a small file, just to have a file with 6 lines of code on it. But that's great. Like the smaller the better, and there's no cost to how many files you have. It might become hard to keep track of, but I'll tell you why I think this is the best way to go, rather than having one file for all of your stuff, is that when we come to committing this, so I'm just going to say added products, methods. When we make a change now, so let's say someone comes in, quiet dogs, someone comes in and changes this and adds an exclamation mark to the end of it, right? In our changes, we can so ignore that. In our changes, we can see this one file has changed. We know that this one file only governs one function. And so it's very, very, very easy to see and predict what that change means. Because if we had 10 other functions in here and we see that this file's been changed, it could be affecting lots of different things. So this is advantageous for a number of reasons, and there's really no disadvantage to it apart from the fact that you might find it irritating to have 100 tiny files in a large project. But I'm just showing you my preferences here. It's not a rule of thumb, or it's not a law. It's just a way of structuring. Okay. So next up, let's do some storage. So for storage, we are going to have save. We're going to have load. And we're going to have remove. So let's start with the easiest one, which is going to be remove. So in just writing it normally, this hardly requires any code. It's one line. We shouldn't really need a whole function for it, to be honest, but we're going to anyway, just to keep things consistent, because we do need one for save and load. So I'm going to call this remove. it's going to accept a key, just like this does, right? This is the key here. So we change this to key. And because I'm just going to return it, I could write it like that, or I could write it differently. I could write export const remove equals and then an arrow function. And here I can actually just say local storage remove item, like that. The reason is that all we're doing is passing this key into this function here. So this is a shorthand. These two things do the exact same thing, but this is very nice. It's one line of code. I think that looks nice to my eyes. So we're going to leave that like that. A one-line file, not pointless. Okay, and then we are going to do load and save. So I'm going to do save first, and let's do it in the same style here. So save equals function, arrow function, and for save we're going to have the key, i.e. the name of the thing we're saving, and we're going to have the value, i.e. the data that we do want to save. And if we look at the normal way of doing this, it is just a case of setting key values. So in theory, we could do the same thing that we did in this file, but we don't want to do that, because if we pass an array or an object in here, it's going to cause havoc. We need to do something before that. So before we pass something through, we need to sanitize our content, which is going to be json.stringify value. This is going to make sure that this variable is always a string. And that's because, so if I hover here, you can see sanitize is a string. And if I hover here, you can see that value must also be a string. So if these two things don't match up, we're going to have a really bad time. So that's what this is doing here, is it's just making sure that whatever we pass in is passed in as a string. Sanitized with a D, and then I'm going to pass that in instead. And that's the whole function. That's all it needs to do. So our load function is going to be reasonably similar with a key. And here we're going to get the key. So item is here, but this is not the item. This is a string, right? Because we turn, let's say we have an object. So if we just do a demo. Okay, so a very simple object. And if we wanted to save an example and use that object, this object is going to be turned into a string first. Then it's going to be saved. So when we're on the other side of that equation, this is actually a string. And we might be expecting an object or an array. So we need to do something about that first. And what we're going to do is pass the string. So we can return json.pass string. And since we're not reusing this variable, it's only being used in one place, I'm happy to remove it and just nest those two functions inside there. And since that's just one line, we don't need the brackets and we don't need the return, so we can just put it there like so. So those are three functions. They're very small. There's not a lot going on there. They can be expanded. There are legitimate ways to expand, particularly the load function, but I'm going to leave it there for now. And the last thing I need to do to finish off my module is to create a index file. This is actually called a barrel file. And we're gonna hook these up. Okay. And now in our main file, we should be able to do the exact same thing that we did here. Oops. And say import all as storage from storage.index. And we can say storage.save test. Okay, now head over to DevTools and we can view our local storage details in the application tab. And then if you go application and then local storage and you click on the URL that you have active, you'll see this little table. And in the table, you can see the value that I just passed in as a test. So it's all good and well saving something, but we also need to load that thing. So there we can see index.js line 5 is telling us about this object, and we can see that it's not a string, it is a real object. So that's working. The last thing to test would be storage.remove. And that didn't work. I'm kind of surprised I've gotten this far without something not working, to be honest. Let's do it that way and see if it prefers that. Nope. What did I do wrong? Return. No error. So there's nothing to tell me what I'm doing wrong. Storage.remove. I'm so sure this is right. I don't even know where to oh, there we go. It is working. Okay, let's just double check that since my confidence is now not 100%. So I'm going to store a new value. Maybe it's live server. Could it be live server? Because that is... I feel like something's not connected right now. Okay, that's connected. That's connected. It's just doing slightly strange things. Nope, it doesn't work. Oh, it does. Okay, I think it must be a delay or something like that. It should happen instantaneously, which is why I'm getting flustered here, because this is a very cheap operation, so it really shouldn't be taking longer than like a millisecond. But I get the feeling like something is not refreshing very nicely here. Okay, well, it is working. There's a little bit of a delay. That's not ideal, but I think we can continue. Okay, so we've got the product storage actions. So before we switch to actions, it's probably worth doing some DOM manipulation, i.e. showing some HTML instead of just looking at this blank page. So let us switch gears a little bit, and we'll talk about the different ways to bring HTML into the equation. So the first thing to say is that when you are templating, which is what this activity is called, like I'm going to create a template for all of for the collections and for the NFTs. So when you're templating, it is a good idea to do this in the same place. So I'm going to do all of my templating here in the main file, and I'm going to build up my templates for each type of item I want to show. So there's going to be an NFT template, there's going to be a collection template. And I'm going to make sure that the styling on that is 100% how I want it to be before I move it into JS, because it's much harder to update styling and update details, data attributes and whatnot when something's inside JS. So for now, we're just going to create a dumb template. And I'm going to use the Bootstrap card component for this because it's very handy and I know it off by heart. So we've got, sorry, that is supposed to be an image and it has the class of card image. And we can grab one of our image URLs here to use as a test. And now we're not updating. Oh, okay. I got the source wrong. Static. There we go. So we've got an image. It's way too big and not that helpful. So we need to do something about that. We can say that we want to lay this out in a column. If you don't know Bootstrap, don't worry about this too much. This is really just a shortcut way for me to save time instead of writing a load of styles out. This is just a way to cut down on time. If you are currently doing CSS frameworks, you might want to pay attention to the specifics of what I'm doing. So now we've got that. I've set it to be 4 columns wide, so it's a bit more of a manageable size now. And we can do stuff like add like a footer, I guess, and have buttons in there. So we'll have button, oops. There we go. And our wish lists. Okay. And we are probably going to want a header. And that is going to be the name. Or let's do body. Okay, so it doesn't look that great, but it's something. If we were to take more than one of them, they're going to be laid out in a sort of uniform way, which is what we want. We can change these, we can change the column styles to make them a bit more responsive. So I'm going to say small 6, I'm going to say medium 4, and I'm going to say large, we're going to do 3, and then maybe extra large we'll do 2. So this is changing the size of this column depending on the width of the screen. So this is saving you writing breakpoints basically. But if you haven't gotten to CSS frameworks, you're not allowed to do this yet. I'm just teasing you now. And you can see that that now has kind of a nice flow to it. They never get too big, they never get too small, and you're not going to have a problem of tiny items all taking up one line, for example. So I'm happy to use that. Almost happy, actually. I've just thought of one thing I didn't do. So we have a buy and a wish list button, but we don't actually have any way to like view the detail page for this NFT. So we need to make this card, it's currently a div, that is going to become an A tag, and we're going to give that an href. And the href is going to be the page we want to use for our NFT detail. So I think it makes sense to say that that's called NFT, like nft.html. We could say that, but I'm going to say this instead. These paths, there's a lot contained in a path. Like this tells me quite a lot beyond just, it tells me a lot beyond the fact that I'm looking for something called NFT. It tells me actually that I'm looking for a folder. I'm not looking for a file. I'm not looking for nft.html. I'm looking for the folder called NFT. And since you can't view a folder with a browser, each folder needs an index file. So by calling this nft/index instead of nft.html, it means that that is what we're going to see in the URL bar. And if you go to a website, like if I go to like Reddit, for example, you're going to see that like the URL doesn't end with a .html, because it's not, there is an HTML file here, but really what we're seeing is a whole folder full of content, not just one file. So that's what I'm doing here. And if I create that, so it's going to be nft/index.html. And here, I'll just put a placeholder. Sorry about the chicken. And now, when we click this, we at least go to our page. It looks nice in the URL bar, and it's correct. So that's the start. I can see here that there's a bit of formatting that I don't really like on the text. And thinking about it, having a button inside an anchor tag is a really stupid idea. It's actually invalid HTML. So I'm going to change that, and I'm going to move the A tag. So this is going to go back to being a div. I'm going to pull this, and I'm going to make the image into a link instead. I hope that works. Yeah. Okay. Cool. So now if you click on the image, you go to the page. Otherwise, if you click on the title, you're not going to, and we leave those buttons free for some JavaScript action. So that's just about it from me. The last thing I'm going to do before hooking this up is I'm going to get a dark theme, because I like dark theme. And there's one in particular that's very good that I highly recommend, because he did a really good job of integrating it. It is this one here, and there's even a CDN link for it. So I'm just going to swap. I'm going to swap my style sheet link here with his CDN link, and now we've got dark theme, which I think objectively just looks better, at least to me, which is subjective. So I want to do something with this HTML. I don't want it just to sit here being a placeholder. And there's three ways to skin this cat. Most of you are probably familiar with inner HTML. That tends to be the most popular way to achieve this task, and the reason is that there's a very clear correlation between what you see and what you get. When you're using inner HTML, you're writing the HTML out in a JavaScript file, so it's very easy to look at it and immediately understand what it's supposed to look like on the screen. If you're doing it the other way, which is using document create element, it's a little bit more abstracted. you've got this HTML, but it's stored in a variable, and it's sort of, you're one step further away from seeing how the HTML will actually look at the end of the day. So that's, I think, why people tend to prefer inner HTML. Document create element does end up getting really long-winded. Like if you're trying to do something complicated, like trying to build this thumbnail, this NFT thumbnail, for example, it's going to involve quite a lot of lines of like create a div and then create another div and then put that div inside the other div and then give that div the class of this and give that div the class of that. And then it takes like sometimes 15, 20 lines just to describe one component, which there is nothing bad about. That's not a real problem, but it can make code hard to manage, and the longer that you have to spend thinking, gosh, dogs, can you go do something about these chickens, please? Go on, gypsy out. Sorry, the dogs are slacking. They're supposed to be herding the chickens, but they're just sitting around in the sun. What I was saying was, the longer you have to spend thinking about your own, 5 seconds. All right, sorry about that. Right, to finish my thought for a third time. The longer you spend thinking about your own code before you can make a change is worse. You want to be able to make that change quickly, and you want your code to be easy to understand. So that's where there is a trade-off. And maybe using inner HTML to begin with is easier because that burden is very low. But as time goes on and your requirements get more complicated, you might find that you outgrow inner HTML. So let's take a look at how those look. In our JS, I'm going to make a new folder and I'm going to call that templates. Okay. We're of course going to have a index.js file, the barrel file, and we're also going to have NFT templates. And here we could say export function NFT template, and we're going to require the object that contains the NFT data. If we were using inner HTML, we would have something like, we would probably just return a string. So this would be, we'd go over here and grab our thumbnail, and we would put that in the string, and then we would go through and replace values where they need to be replaced. So for example, source in here, we're going to want to change that to NFT.source. We'll put the collection name in here. We might even want to put the ID. Sorry, I did that the wrong way. The ID in here could be useful. We also need the title. So that's going to be, that'll be the collection name, I suppose. And the href is going to be like that. And all of this comes from our data.json file. So source and URL of that. Okay, so this is not actually going to generate any HTML. It's just going to give us the template. So we could say, if we had an NFT, I'll do that in this file actually. So store.get NFTs. So then we can say NFTs for each, or we'll do a map even. We're going to do the same thing as this for templates. And we'll say templates.nft template. Okay, so what I'm going to do here as a test is I'm going to get the full list of NFTs, and then I'm going to loop through them, and for each item I'm going to return a completed template. And so output should be a list of HTML strings, or an array of HTML strings. And if we look here, we can see an array with 62 items, which is the same as the number of NFTs we have. And we can see here very clearly that everything is as we want it to be. Nothing's been added to the page because we haven't called inner HTML, but at least we have our content here. And if we did want to add it to the page, we could say get the row, so dot row, and I'm referring to this row here. So I'm grabbing this whole row, and I could say row.innerHTML equals, well, we can't put output in there directly because that's an array and this is expecting to have a string, but we can turn the array into a string quite easily by just saying join, and then we're not going to join with anything, we're just going to join with nothing so they all get stuck together. And there you go, there's all of our thumbnails. So that's not really how we want to have it for the final setup, but as a test, that's pretty cool. I'm glad that we at least have something on the screen, and we can still adjust and make sure that we're happy with how the columns are laid out and whatnot. Okay, so the test worked. I'm happy with that. But there's still this missing sort of chunk. So it might be that we create a second function to handle that, or ideally this is sort of all that the template file does because it's a template. Like when you run a template, you shouldn't necessarily create HTML in the DOM straight away. Like there is a reason for it to be a two-step process. And this would be almost the same as if we call this 2, very creative. If I did this with create element, we would have column, create element div, we'd also have card, we'd also have card body, we'd also have card footer. We also have an A tag in there as well. We've got an image. We've got 2 buttons. Well, let's call them buy button. And we've got a wish list button as well. So those are, we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So that's all of the markup or all of the elements we need. But but these elements need to be, they need to be combined, right? Like they're all floating around in midair right now. So column needs to have the card inside it. So we use append to do that. And then card needs to have, it has the A tag, it has the body, and it has the footer. So it's going to have what am I doing? A, card body, and card footer. And then what else do we need to do? Card footer needs to have stuff inside it. The A tag needs to have stuff inside it. Append the image, because we've got an image inside the A tag, and we need to take the footer, card footer, and we need to append the 2 buttons. And we're not even done yet. Now they're all positioned correctly, but they don't have classes. So now we need to go through this whole thing and start adding classes. And this is why I was saying that it gets incredibly complicated and long-winded doing this with create element, even though it's nice. I'm actually going to do that with class name. So we can set all the class names. Not very fun, I've got to say. The image. Yep, then the buttons both need to have classes. So yeah, I think I sympathize with people who don't enjoy all of this long process, because it is very annoying. It's a lot of code, and that code doesn't look like HTML, so it feels like it's going to break. It's not a clear conversion. Right, so is that everything? I think so. Right, so now we would return the column, because that's the one that contains everything else. So if we go back to our index file and we get this back, now we can, instead of saying NFTs map with this, we'll say use the second template we've used. Row is going to be the same, and then instead of saying inner HTML, we're going to say row.append output. And with a bit of luck, nope. Okay, oh right, we forgot text, sources, href. So even more code to go into this one. We need to add a.href equals nft.source, href even. And we need to have image.source equals nft.source, and we need to say card body inner text equals nft.collection name. How are we looking there? It's looking better. Buy button is just buy. Okay. I don't know why there's a gap between there's not a gap here, but there is a gap here. Yep, no idea why that is. I can see here that the link didn't work. The href, and that's because I got this wrong. It's actually URL, not href. So if I click here, I can see that that's looking good. Now if I click through on one of these, if you look in my URL, I've got this query string, and the key is ID, and then the value is the ID for that NFT. I can remove my first one now because that's just a placeholder. So if I go back here, and I can delete this. One more thing I might want to do before finishing up with that template is just to add some padding, some margin to the bottom. I think 4 is the right amount. Okay, so now everything's spaced out nicely. It's presented nicely, and we're using create element. But like, just compare how much code we have here and how much code we have here. It's a big difference. And I want to tell you to use option 2, but I know it's impractical, and it's just a lot of work to do something quite simple. You don't want to have to do this for every single template you ever write. So luckily there's a third way. This is my preferred way of doing things. And this uses a technology that is called template. So if we go to MDN quickly, so here it's an HTML tag, and what this does is it allows you to write out your component in real HTML, in an HTML file, and then it provides a way to grab this template and reuse it lots of times. So what we can do in our HTML file, if we go back here and take this again, in our file, we can have an area called templates, and we're going to have a template tag, and we'll give it an ID and call it NFT. Now we can put our whole item in here, and I should really go and delete all of these, but it doesn't matter because we're going to replace them anyway. Sorry, I'm just going to switch off. I'm going to switch this off so we have a blank canvas again. So you can't see templates, they're invisible. You can see here that my template is here. We have this document fragment, but nothing's showing up on the screen. So we don't really have to worry about exactly how this is looking, even though you can see that there's still JavaScript stuff in there, because we're going to go through and replace this. So that is fine. We'll go back to our JavaScript here. And what I'm going to do in this file is say the template is in the document. So we're going to use query selector like normal. And we're going to be looking for template with the ID of NFT. If we have a template, maybe we don't, then we want to I've got to quickly look at, yeah, okay. So template.content.clone node. So I'll go through this now. So template.content is referring to this here. Everything inside of this document fragment. That is the template.content. The template is the whole thing, and the content is the inner contents of the template. And clone node just means make a duplicate of an element. So if I could clone an image tag, or I could clone an anchor tag, or whatever. The reason we're putting true in here is because we want a deep copy instead of a shallow copy. So we could just clone, like if you had, or if we have this and we did a shallow copy, we would just be copying this top tag. We'd be skipping all of this stuff, but we want to include all of that stuff. So we're using true in here. So that means that we have our NFT here. Actually, no, I can't call it NFT, call it item. And this item has all of this already. We just need to replace these values. So this is going to be like a combination of the two, because we still need to set stuff like this, these values here. Anything where in our template there's a curly brace, basically. So we can get the image, and the way that we do that is we do a query selector, but we do it on our item instead of doing it on the whole document. We're just looking inside our new item that we've just created, and we're looking for the image. The image source is going to be NFT source. So if I just return this, at this point, all I'm doing is setting the image. I'm not doing anything else with this template. So you can see that the title hasn't been changed yet, and the URL is not correct, but the image is correct. So that means that we're doing things in the right way. We can continue this pattern by saying card body equals item.query selector, and card body is going to have inner text. Okay, now we've got our titles working properly. Next thing to do is to go through this with an anchor tag, and that's going to be the href, and it's going to be the URL. So now we can click through properly, and I think the ID is the only thing, so we can just say item.id equals nft.id. And that is exactly the same thing. Did that not? Yeah, I need to put it on the card. So this is the column, not the card. So I'm going to say card.id equals nft.id. And there we have the correct ID for the card. So now all three of these template functions are identical in terms of what they do at the end of the day. This one is still the easiest to read, but this bottom one is the nicest, really, because we're handling real HTML. Like when you do query selector, you're not getting a string. You're getting a real HTML object that you can work with. It's much more powerful to be handling HTML as an HTML object rather than as an HTML string. So whenever possible, it's better to do it that way. And what I like about using this template is that we still have this reference point. All we need to do, if we want to change the design of this item here, is lift it out of, it doesn't have an image, that's why it's showing up small. Let's say MT5. So you can see the broken image there. All we need to do is lift it out of that template tag, and then you can see it again, right? So it's very easy to make a change and I can continue working on this template, and it will, oh dear. All right, sorry about that. Turns out if you refresh Discord, it will refresh the whole app. I meant to refresh the browser. Okay, so that's really it for templating. It's nice. It's nice to work with. It's a compromise between the two different ways of creating DOM content, and I'm going to select that method to be my definitive method here. So I'm going to change this to NFT templates, and in here that's going to become like that. And I'm happy with how that's looking. We can move on. If I was going to do a collection template, I would do it the same way. And I think that's really the only two items that need to be looped on like this. So it wouldn't really make sense to make a template for anything else. Looking at the time here, we've just clocked 2 hours in total. I know it's been a bit disrupted. I'm thinking that we should probably leave it here and pick up the actions on the next session, because this is where a lot of the complexity is going to come in. So this is probably the section that's going to take the longest, to be honest, is the next module. And I think I'm probably going to run out of time. I think I probably want another 2 hours to do that. So what I'll do is I'll put a pin in this for now. I'm not going to change this repo. I'm going to leave it in its current state. And we'll do some questions if you have questions. I was trying to rush through a lot. I was a bit ambitious with how much I wanted to cover, but I would say this is almost just over halfway through probably. But if there's any questions on what we have covered so far, if I go back to the plan, we have discussed JSON a little bit. We've done DOM manipulation. We've done some of this. We've definitely looked at arguments and return values, but we have not used any default arguments, and we have used arrow functions. For the array methods, we have not used for each. We have used map and reduce, and we have used find, but we haven't used filter or for each. And then we currently don't have any events at all. We don't have any data attributes at all. In fact, let's do data attributes. That fits in with what I'm doing now. Okay, so to finish off this template, let's add data attributes. What is relevant? What do we want to, we already have the ID, so we don't need to do data ID. It's kind of unnecessary. So if we take a look at our object, we've got ID, collection name, source, URL, price, owner, on sale, and created date. So I think these are relevant. I would say that those are good things to be setting to the HTML. And I will tell you why in a second. Let's see if I can do this in a swishy way. Nope, I can't. I'm just trying to think if I could do something like this. Data. Okay. So we have our 4 slots here. And I might just make them a little bit nicer looking. And then in our template file, we now have to set these. So on the card, we're going to say card.dataset.price. same thing 4 times. It's going to be sale, and that's on sale, I think. And created, and that's created date. And now if we look, we've got our card, it's got an ID, it's got a data price, data owner, data sale, data created. Now, why is that so useful? Well, we can do some pretty crazy stuff like filtering with CSS now. So I can say data data sale. Is that going to work? We'll see. Okay, didn't work. I just need, okay, so what we're going to do here is if did I break it? Yeah, I broke it. Sorry, I've completely lost my mind. There we go. So now, if they're on sale, they're going to get this attribute. Otherwise, they're not going to get the attribute. And we can say anything with the data sale attribute should be hidden. Oh man, that's annoying. Data sale. Are they all on sale? Is that the problem? No. Oh, right. It's because it's because it's on my template here. We actually don't need them on the template. Now I think about it, we can take those off. That's what we want. There we go. So once again, data sale. We can say background red. And now we can quickly see the items that are on sale, or we could even say if you are a card, I want to get rid of that red now. So if you are a card and you are not on sale, sorry, this is very small. So if you are not on sale, display none. The reason it's not reflowing nicely is because we've got columns in there, and I'm not setting display none on the columns. So we'd have to like jig the HTML around a little bit to get that right. But just to prove the point that by writing your HTML carefully, you can get a lot for free. You can get a lot of like nice little tricks for free. And this kind of filtering is one of them. If I had that data sale on the column instead of the card, then it would be hiding them properly. But just as a demonstration of how useful they can be without even using JavaScript, yeah, I think that's worth doing. The price, we could even use the price. We could do something like card after, and then the content would be data. I can't quite remember how to word this. CSS pseudo selector content from data attribute. Atter. That's what I want. Okay, so what we can do is we can say the content of this thing should be data price, and then you can see the price has appeared there. Give it position absolute. Let's put it in the top right corner. Let's give it a bright red background, why not? Let's say and maybe we want to put that a little bit away from the corner, or even yeah, put it like that and like that. And now very quickly and easily, we've got our prices showing. And that's not even that, we're not even using an HTML element for that. If you look here, it's the after pseudo element. So this is a very effective way of keeping your HTML small, but still showing things like the price. You could also show the owner. So I could take this whole class and I could duplicate it, and I could say that I'm actually looking to put this before, and I want the owner, and we're going to go left instead, and we're going to go blue instead. So now you have the price and you have the owner of the repository, and I'm going to say cool, I'm happy with that, and I'm going to put it in my CSS file to store it permanently and call it a day. Apart from the fact that we can refactor this quite a lot, because most of these are shared styles. So we could say, actually, before I do that. So when refactoring, can be nice to take a third copy. So leaving your original two there for now. You know that these two are identical. So in fact, we can do it this way. So we can remove these. They're identical. They're identical. They're not identical. They're not. They are, they are. They are. And all of these are as well. So these are the unique styles, and we can take out everything that's not unique and keep our styles exactly where they were, and now we're dry. All right, I'm gonna wrap up this session there, and we'll come back to it next week and finish it off. Does anyone have any questions?